So first of all, a very warm welcome to all of our panelists. I'm Aarushi Koundal. I basically look after the renewable energy coverage at ETEnergyWorld. And today we have a very esteemed panel to discuss a very, very interesting topic, which is the road ahead for India's solar sector. And to speak on this, we have with us Mr. Vinay Rustagi. He is the Senior Director at CRISIL Market Intelligence and Analytics. Next, we have Mr. Hitesh Paliwal. He is the Senior Vice President and Zonal Head, Corporate Banking Group, State Bank of India. We also have with us Mr. Karan Singh. He is the Director of Sales, India, Southeast Asia, and South Korea at SMA. And we have Rishabh Jain. He is the Senior Program Lead at Council on Energy, Environment, and Water. So thank you all for being a part of this discussion today. Starting off this discussion, let me begin by requesting each one of you to kindly share your views on today's topic. We can, Mr. Rustagi, you can go first.
Okay, thank you, Aarushi. Pleasure to be here. Thank you for inviting me. The solar sector, it's a very interesting case. It's a story of almost, I would say, two halves. On one side, we have this very popular perception that solar sector is just booming away. Amazing growth times. The government is very supportive with a huge target, etc. Technology obviously is very conducive for India and so on. So that is the one side of the story. And indeed, the fundamentals for solar in India are very, very strong. But the fact is that the reality is actually much more muted and much more sober in contrast. Why that is the case, let me kind of give you some numbers. So, for example, in 2023, the calendar year, we added a total of about 7.5 gigawatts of solar capacity from utility scale, ground mounted capacity, rooftop solar, off-grid, etc., everything combined. Now, that is against a government target, which is almost something like 34 gigawatts per annum until 2030. So it is basically only about 20% of the government's target that we added last year. And even if I take a longer time frame, if I look at the last 5 years, the picture is very, very similar actually. In the last 5 years, we've added something like 42 gigawatts of capacity, which is about 8.4 gigawatts per annum. So clearly, it is immediately obvious that what we are actually doing on the ground in terms of new investments, new capacity addition is much, much smaller and way behind the government targets. And then we obviously ought to look at, why that is the case and what are the kind of factors which are restricting the growth of this sector and realizing the government targets. So we see but before I do that, I also want to point out that within these numbers, there are various segments in the market right now. There is the utility scale segment, which essentially is for supplying power to the discoms and the national utilities. There is the corporate segment, both ground mounted as well as rooftop solar, which is for supplying power to the corporate consumers directly to meet their decarbonization objectives. And then there is residential solar and there is agri solar. So within all these segments, it is the corporate segment which has actually been looking the most buoyant or the most positive over the last 3-4 years. So much so that this segment is growing irrespective of what is happening elsewhere in the sector. And last year, it accounted for more than 50% of the total capacity, solar capacity addition in the country. So that part of the market is something which is growing very rapidly because the corporates are increasingly saying that they need to reduce their emissions to be able to achieve their decarbonization and net zero targets. Now, just coming back to why we are lagging so far behind the targets. So there is, I would say, trying to give it a slightly structured approach. There is a supply side. On the supply side, we need land, we need transmission, we need capital, we need technology to be able to execute these projects and create new capacity. And then there is the demand side in terms of what do the consumers want in terms of demand for power, at what time the power should be available, what should be the cost of power, etc. So on the supply side, unfortunately, the reality is that the land and transmission, they are becoming bigger challenges by the day because solar sector needs a lot of land. Every megawatt of capacity needs about 3 to 4 acres of land. To date, there is no kind of concerted government policy or a plan to identify big parcels of land and make them available to solar project developers. The land holdings throughout India are pretty fragmented. The land acquisition process, the conversion process, the utilization process varies from state to state and takes a very, very long time. So that is becoming one major challenge in growth of the sector. The second one is that almost every new megawatt that we add into the grid requires a new megawatt of transmission capacity, because these projects are usually located in the very extreme corners of the country where there is no transmission grid available and there is no consumption of power either. So which means we need to evacuate all the power to the main consumption centers. Now there is a government roadmap of about of going up to 2030 in terms of how much capacity we need to add. That is almost like 2,50,000 crore rupees of plan, which covers both interstate as well as intrastate capacity. But that plan again on the ground, the implementation is running slower than expected. Today, whichever state you look at, there is a constraint on availability of evacuation capacity, both in terms of interstate network as well as intrastate network. And there are cases, in fact, where developers have participated in the tenders, won the capacity, they're executing the projects, but there is no clarity on when the transmission evacuation infrastructure will be ready. So that is the second kind of constraint. Third, what has happened over the last 2 to 3 years, the government has switched the focus to Make in India. While we were still very heavily dependent on China for imports of modules mainly, but even inverters to a very large extent. And that policy, which combines key aspects like basic customs duty, ALMM, which means every single module supplied in the market should be registered and certified with the government of India, has been quite volatile, has gone through a lot of changes. There have been a lot of kind of amendments, giving rise to a lot of kind of issues in terms of what is the supply of modules going to be, where can the developers buy the modules from, what technologies, at what price points, etc. So that has been a big, big question mark. And even today, for example, we don't know what is the status of the LMM policy after 31st of March onwards. The government issued an amendment, but the amendment was withdrawn, creating more uncertainty in the market, right? So that is again a kind of one challenge. And if I can add just the last one, historically, the sector has really benefited from the massive inflow of capital from the world's big global investors, be it the sovereign wealth funds, the private equity funds, the pension funds, oil and gas companies, utilities, etc. But what has happened in the last year or so is that many of these funds, they've had, I would say they see opportunities in India with much more caution. They feel that the risk reward in India is unattractive in comparison to some of the other markets in the world. And hence the equity capital flow is beginning to dry up a little. In contrast, the situation on the debt side actually has changed the other way around quite interestingly. The lenders, which used to be quite cautious early on, today, whether it is the banks or the financial institutions, the debt situation is actually quite liquid and there is an ample availability of debt in the Indian market. But if I look at the pipeline of solar projects, there's about 70 gigawatt of pipeline today, projects which have been tendered and allocated to the developers. But the equity availability is really kind of in short supply. And most developers are in the market trying to raise equity through primary or secondary means. So, that is kind of on the supply side, we see all these challenges. On the demand side, all the talk always is, unfortunately, that solar is the cheapest available power and everybody should be buying it. But that actually, hides a very painful reality that solar is an intermittent source of power. Solar needs to be blended with whether it is storage, hydro, gas, or other forms of power to make it a reliable source of power, which is basically what the consumers need, whether it is the discoms or the corporate consumers. So the reality is that despite solar being the cheapest form of power, many of the large consumers, including the discoms, have been quite reluctant to come forward and buy and commit to 25-year PPAs. So very often tenders have been completed, auctions have been done, the developers are sitting on letters of award, but the discoms have not come forward to sign the PPAs. So we clearly need more. I think various things can be done to address the intermittency challenge, but the biggest one by far is the addition of more storage capacity. And there is good news on that front because storage costs are coming down. There are some interesting developments on issuing of storage as well as some hybrid tenders. So hopefully over a period of time we will be able to resolve it. But the current reality is that I personally feel that we have left it too late to add more storage capacity and to address the intermittency issue. So I think these are the some kind of supply and demand kind of challenges which have held up the growth of the sector, and they basically need to be tackled very systematically with a long-term roadmap in mind. I can touch upon a couple of other themes. One is, for example, the manufacturing, which has become very, very relevant. But let me maybe you want to take other people's views before we come back to that.
Yeah, we can dive deeper later.
Sure, sure. Thank you.
Mr. Paliwal, your opening remarks.
Yeah, hi, good afternoon. I'll take you from Mr. Rustagi. So, see, things are mending otherwise, whatever Mr. Rustagi said. So, in toto, I would say that we are in consonance. But with the passage of time, we are observing that the things are mending. And we are from brown shoot, we are seeing some green shoots down the line.
Correct.
Even if the capacity addition vis-a-vis whatever were the targets, but the growth in particular is in 3 digits, I can say so. And as we aspire for this carbon neutral target for 2070, which is a far-flung thing down the line, maybe we'll be there or not, that we don't know in the current comorbid environment. But the point is that, see, in the renewable energy mix, every year on year, we are finding that it is increasing. And in the entire grid, the energy mix as on today, out of installed capacity in the renewable space, we can see the solar is giving the key pedestal. And even if we whatever the midterm targets which are there on the floor, which is for 2030, and as Mr. Rustagi said that we'll be adding around 34 gigawatt on an annualized basis. So after having a proper haircut and all, still I would see that there is a ample headway which is available for all of us. And in order to meet those targets, the system is very fine fettled as on today, unlike the earlier ecosystem where every the leading commercial institution were reeling under a lot of issues. So I think the system is very much fine fettled. And I would see in the investor fraternity also, every customer to whom we keep on meeting, so they are very gung-ho about the Indian policy framework, which is now being implemented at ground zero. And regarding, there are some kinks which are always there. As a lending institution also, we also keep on observing whether it is a security perfection which is emanating through the land issues and maybe other issues, the panel module supplies, BCD, LMMM, and many other things. So that keep on coming. But nutshell, we can say so that we are in a progressive, ecosystem. And down the line, I would see that in the power, especially, solar will give the key impetus. And on the generation side also, solar is more of a uniform kind of stuff vis-a-vis wind. So lender or the investment fraternity, everybody is comfortable. And our portfolio in the renewable space also, especially in solar, it is rising year on year. And in small hydro also, which is part of the renewable space, the biomass is also part of that. 30 crores loan is also for the priority sector. So I think a lot of key I would say tailwinds which are there from the policy side also, and these are now being implemented at ground zero. So this is how it is, and I believe that the things will further mend. Whatever Mr. Rustagi said, down the line, we will see more green shoots in this particular space. Thank you.
Mr. Singh, your opening comments.
Yeah, thank you, Aarushi. So again, I will take the cues from Mr. Rustagi and from Mr. Paliwal. So I won't reiterate the finance aspects and the challenges we are facing. I think they're very clearly highlighted that what the investors or the developers are realistically facing when it comes to equity, when it comes to acquisition of land, transmission, right? But I would like to give a kind of a technical viewpoint on this, right? So yes, 5 years ago, it was all about solar, right? But the biggest challenge which solar has is, and the same as goes with wind as well, is it's intermittent power, right? It is not a secured power which you can forecast for the next 24 hours, 48 hours, right? So it's intermittent. So now the talk of the town, and most of the tenders tendered out by SECI and the different discoms in India are basically hybrid tenders. So it's a combination of wind plus solar plus battery, so as to ensure a round-the-clock offtake of power, right? So this is what the talk of the town is. So this is what is realistically happening. 2 years ago, it was a big challenge when it comes to battery technology, because the battery prices, because of the shortage and because of the surge in demand coming out mainly from the US and European market, it was almost, I will say, the per kilowatt hour battery price was around $300, right, per kilowatt hour. Nowadays, that's almost half the cost. So battery or the best technology is becoming more and more viable, right? So now the viability when it comes to the commercial aspects of solar plus wind plus PES is becoming more attractive, even from an investor point of view, even from a discom point of view, right? It's achieving a state of grid parity, right? Now this will become a big challenge, Aarushi, in the future, because even if we take a conservative estimate that India will achieve net zero by 2070, it's very easy to say net zero. But I have heard Mr. R.K. Singh, our power minister, say in multiple forums, right, that we will achieve net zero. But net zero is just saying that, okay, we will shun away from the brown power, right? We will mothball our coal assets, mothball our gas turbines, right? But that is just power we are talking about. What about the grid stability or the ancillary services associated, right? So we have to understand that solar, when it comes to inverters, it is basically an inverter-based resource. It's an IBR resource. It's an electronics device. It doesn't have any rotating device. So by default, it doesn't have any stability services like inertia, right? Fault current right through, black start. So these are the upcoming technologies which will definitely play a bigger role. And it's already prevalent in the market like US, in the market like UK, Germany. I remember in the past, we used to say Indian grids are very complicated. To be very honest with you, looking at a global perspective, the Indian grid is still more stable as compared to grids in UK, as compared to the grids in, let's say, Australia, Philippines, because those are island grids, right? The demand centers are located on the shores and the power is located in the central, let's say, location, right? So all these technologies, Aarushi, is available even in the IBR-based resources. It's just a matter of the decision makers implementing those things, right? Yes, we do appreciate from a European context, we appreciate India's philosophy of made in India, right? But that also sometimes deters global manufacturers from bringing in the latest technology into India, right? One simple example is the BIS guideline, right? So every inverter must be tested for BIS suitability, applicability, whether those BIS testing is actually required, because most of the technology available is as such certified by IAC, right? So we will dwell down much more deeper into this. But all in all, the message from our perspective, from SMS perspective, is definitely India is a focus market, right? India, plain and simple, looking at the demand, looking at the population growth, looking at the average consumption of power, definitely the power growth is there, right? India, I think last year, US definitely overshot a lot of countries, but that was mainly driven by the incentives of IRA, right? Which is going to last for the next 10 years or so, right? But India is still the top 4 market after China, US, I think Australia, and then it's India. So definitely the future is bright. But then what we will always recommend or propose is that all the stakeholders must work hand in hand to understand what are the challenges which are going to come to India in the future, right? Just by penetrating more and more renewable, that is not the solution. You also have to look about stability of the grid, stability of the utilities, right? So there's a lot of things which probably, as we go deeper in this discussion, Aarushi, we would like to highlight that. Yeah, but thank you.
Sure, sure. Mr. Jain, your comments.
Thank you, Aarushi. Of course, a lot has already been said with a lot of numbers, thanks to Vinay. But I'll just try to reiterate some of these points slightly differently. We, of course, have our net zero targets, right? Based on one of the CW analysis, we estimate that to achieve net zero, we would require 5,000 plus gigawatts of solar, which is huge by 2070. The NDC targets are, of course, there, which is maybe approximately 250 to 280 gigawatts of solar. As of now, today, as of today, or maybe as of February, the numbers were 75 gigawatts of solar. As Vinay has already mentioned, that some of these targets or the installations have not kept with the expected trend if we have to actually meet our NDC targets. I mean, in most likelihood, maybe we'll take a couple of more years to reach our 500 gigawatt of non-fossil capacity if the current pace is there. However, we also need to realize that we reached 35 gigawatt, I think, in the FY20. So the next doubling in some sense happened in the next 4 years, which should have potentially happened in 2 years, but it took maybe 4 years. Maybe the next doubling will happen slightly earlier, in 3 years or so, or maybe around 4 years, same. But the way I see the growth of the sector since the launch of the National Solar Mission is three parts, I would say. The first 10 years, in some sense, everyone in the ecosystem was learning to set up solar projects. It was not, I would say, even though it was plug and play, everyone, as Vinay even said, the debt has increased, right? But you would say in the early 2010, between 2020 and 15, they were lender engineers. So lenders even did not know how does this technology work. So someone had to actually go teach some of these banks that, okay, this is the technology that will work for 25 years. These are the potential risks, etc., etc. And now they've got, of course, more comfortable with the technology itself. However, in this decade, I would say from 2020 to 2030, all of us are learning how to integrate solar better. Because, I mean, till 2020, whatever you would feed in the grid, there's enough capacity to absorb. However, it is not the case at all right now. With EVs coming in, with batteries, and with so much solar, it will be a unique challenge for both grid operators, but also many of the solar companies, including the importance of inverter. How do you ramp up, ramp down some of these solar projects if you can? Otherwise, you have to switch on, switch off. But how do we ensure that every unit that is generated does not get wasted and is, of course, integrated? So this year, I would say, will be very important for all of us to understand the integration challenge on technical side. But at the same time, as new projects are being set up, as Vinay rightly mentioned, the transmission capacity, the land, and facilitating land for 30 gigawatts is easy in 10 years. But as we plan to do 30 gigawatts every year, it will definitely not be easy. Most of the easiest land, I would say, would have already been taken away. So we have to find lands which are maybe sometimes categorized the agriculture. Sometimes there's conflict. There are some other reasons. Sometimes these are in defense areas, because that's also the borderline areas are specifically the areas which have good insulations also. So this year, I think it will be focused, and that is where we are seeing a lot of these challenges in terms of the policy uncertainty that is happening. And maybe beyond 2030, once we are more comfortable with some of these, I think it will be easier for us to scale up. And that is where I think I'm hopeful that many of our learnings in this particular decade will help us exponentially grow the solar sector to meet our 2070 ambition. The third important point I would want to say is that until a couple of years ago, the India solar sector growth was more or less completely dependent on the domestic policies in some sense. Whereas in the last year or maybe last 2 years, a lot of the solar installation will also depend on how the global geopolitics shaping up. And I'll want to explain why. One is, of course, on the manufacturing of some of these projects, right? There is significant overcapacity that has now taken place in terms of the manufacturing. Now, because of the manufacturing itself, because of the significant overcapacity, the prices are reducing significantly. And the prices are what, between 11 cents, and you can, of course, find modules expensive, but maybe 11 to 15 cents. Now, what this is leading is that to safeguard our own domestic industry, we have put in some of these barriers, both in terms of tariff, non-tariff barriers. However, there are, of course, modules that are available at cheaper prices and modules that you can deploy beyond the power sector itself for your own use. That is still possible. And then there is a disparity in terms of the prices. So we have to still understand that what is the impact of the global prices on India's large-scale utility tenders, because the low-price solar modules may still go into the other CNI projects that, of course, Vinay highlighted were 50% in the last year. Also, in terms of the manufacturing, India has, at least in the last year, there's significant exports that were happening in the last 2 years to countries like mostly to US, but maybe to Europe also, because there's a demand for non-Chinese solar modules, etc.
Right.
However, as IRA provides a lot of benefits and there is significant manufacturing capacity that is expected to come up in the coming years, what will happen to many of the manufacturing facilities that are highly dependent on say export markets. Now, if those manufacturing facilities, say by 25, 26, continue and are unable to say service the export market, will we then continue to support them to install in India, which will then, of course, be at a higher cost compared to the modules that will be available, then delaying or maybe impacting the offtake of some of these projects, because domestic modules may lead to high prices of the power tariffs, and then, of course, the discoms may or may not necessarily be comfortable to this. So a lot is beyond our control because we cannot control if someone is underselling some of these prices. Of course, there are measures where we can, but I would say in the next years, geopolitics will also play a very important role on determining what will and how will not just India's but global solar deployment shape up.
Right. So I think we have set the tone right for the conversation. And let me dive deeper into it and ask you, Mr. Rustagi, where are we currently in terms of landscape and growth potential for India's solar sector? Also, what more needs to be done to fast track this? And apart from this, additionally, as you were mentioning about land and manufacturing, so I would also like you to touch upon those points as well, briefly, for our audience.
Yeah, sure, Aarushi. So I think in terms of the outlook, indeed, the outlook over the next 2 to 3 years is very, very positive. We do see that a lot of the challenges which the industry has faced over the last few years, they've kind of slowly they are being abated, and the government is taking the necessary measures to support the industry. Last year, I said we added about 7.5 gigawatts of capacity. This year, we do expect, depending on clarification on ALMM and some of the other policies, the capacity addition could be as high as 20 gigawatts or thereabouts. And with the right kind of support, that could be the new sustainable level of capacity addition that we could add over the next few years. So I think the outlook is looking more positive. We should be able to kind of make a step change in terms of the progress that we achieve on a year basis. There are a lot of enabling factors. One is technology that we use in the sector, whether it is module technology, whether it is storage technology, that has improved by leaps and bounds. There are robots being used in all these projects today for automatic cleaning. There are trackers being used so that the same module can basically, be oriented on a daily basis to kind of track the sun's movements to produce more power. So the effectiveness and the efficiency of capital in deployment of these projects is improving a lot. On the manufacturing side, the government has come out with a number of measures. Apart from the customs duty and ALMM, there is also a PLI scheme in place in which there is about 48 gigawatts of capacity which was awarded to various companies to create vertically integrated capacity. Again, the good thing over there is that this capacity can serve not just the Indian demand, but also the global demand. There are many other countries around the world, whether it is US, in Europe, Australia, etc., who are looking to reduce their reliance on imports from China. And capacity addition in these countries is also not keeping pace. So, there is a desire to kind of move away from China and find alternate sourcing opportunities. So India, the exports last year alone touched about 4 gigawatts of solar modules, which is kind of, almost 3 times the exports in the year before that. So I think if we play our cards well, there is a great opportunity for India to kind of step up and become like a technology supplier to the rest of the world. And of course, we're talking only about solar, but the same could be replicated in batteries and other forms of renewable technologies as well. So I think there are lots of kind of positives to look forward to in the next few years.
Yeah. So moving on, Mr. Paliwal, my next question is to you. So what are the kind of financing and investment opportunities that are available in this segment? And also the kind of challenges various stakeholders of this sector face?
As far as opportunities are concerned, there are ample opportunities in this particular space. Whether it is a ground-mounted utility scale or the RESCO, CapEx, C&I segment, rooftop, we could see in the energy mix, the ground-mounted is giving the key contribution. And with the passage of time, earlier we were observing that the debt component on the overall structuring was 35-65. Then it came to 70-30, 25-75. Today, I could see that the independent power producers are negotiating a debt equity ratio of 85-15 also. And I could see the lenders are very much forthcoming. And as far as investment fraternity is concerned, rather than, they are just playing with a meager IRR of 2, 3, 5%. Here they are getting, mid-teen returns to the tune of 15-16%. And basis generation on the P90 estimates, they are observing that these are the projects which will be keep on giving them a annuity over a period of 25 years, 20 years. This is the utility life of the project, useful life of the project. And India being the country wherein we are aspiring for this renewable segment, the cogent demand is very much there for the lenders. And for example, we are lending to corporates and AA, AAA rated. Most of their top echelons are having KRA that they should be working on a negative working capital cycle with a current ratio of less than 1, where the creditors are funding for all the working capital as well as the long-term fund requirements. But here, an economy where the cogent demand is coming out of the greenfield installation of the solar projects. So as a lender, we are also very much forthcoming. And this is giving a impetus to the books wherein ultimately, although the ALM part is also one of the key challenge, wherein we are lending to the tune of 20 years, 21 years over a period of time, and wherein the deposit base is only the average, the maturity of the deposit is less than 5 years. So in a way, this is one of the challenge as well. But considering the 47 to 40, maybe 50 solar parks which are there in the country, and when we were talking about the the land area also, still I could see that 35,000 square kilometer area, which is still set aside in the Thar Desert for the solar projects. So and that is enough for maybe 700 to 1,000 gigawatt of the solar projects down the line, in order to meet whatever the carbon neutral target that we are aspiring for. So this is how it is. And if I may say so, that not even the institution, public sector or the private sector banks, even the foreign banks are also very much forthcoming for the greenfield project lending. And in fact, the NBFCs are also very much active in this particular space. And in the energy mix side, I could see the as far as any structure like InvITs, which is giving a fungibility between the various assets where the co-obligor structure is there. So that is also giving impetus to this particular segment. And if I see that many of the key sponsors now, they are staring at a mix of C&I as well as utility, where though they are going with the discounts for 25 years PPA at a very competitive rates, but in C&I segment they are getting good PPA rates, and therefore they are able to have that proper mix wherein the return on the capital employed is also good, and in turn risk reward matrix is also in a way frugally structured. So this is how it is. And all the pedigree wise, I could see that all the operators are what we had observed earlier, that we were estimating a PLF at P90 22% on the AC side. Today those projects are generating a PLF of 30%. So I could see that although still there is the journey is still even not midway, like most of the projects are 5, 6, 7 years, and still we could see the useful life is there for remaining 17, 18 years. So time will tell because these are all ground mounted structures and any typhoon can, dismantle them. So this is one of the risk, and but therefore as a lender we are going for insurance, reinsurance and many other safeguards. But so far I could say that the portfolio is doing, it is a good portfolio that we can see in the solar side. The generations are almost outstripping, and whether it is a C&I, whether it is a utility, whether it is a rooftop, the quality of the book is good, and down the line also we are gazing at this particular segment very keenly, and we'll be there to support them.
Right.
Some challenges. So the key challenges I could see on a macro canvas, that only 3 challenges as a lender and being a stakeholder to those kind of projects. Number one is the, whatever is the geography, it is a natural source, the irradiation, the geography wherever the projects are being installed. So that is one of the critical aspect. Number 2 is the quality of the modules. So although whatever is the competitive environment, but I could see that lot of sponsors are now making beeline to install this solar module assembling plant here in the country, and in turn they are in order to fob off the Chinese module supplies. So they are exporting to the US as well, Europe as well, and they are meeting the captive demand in the country as well. And third is, on the quality of the module also, everybody proclaimed that they are part of the Bloomberg and, ALM, MNRE, ALM list also. But the time will tell that the performance ratio should be, at least at a normative level of more than 75%. And third, the counterparty risk, which normally we see that most of the discoms in the country, they are reeling under a lot of issues where the ARR ACS gap is there, AT&C losses are there, and RFC, PFC, most of the banks are funding those shortcomings which are there at their operating level. So I think so that down the line the discoms health, financial health will also improve, and a culture wherein the revenue will outstrip the cost and AT&C losses will be trimmed, and for the long-term contracts they will not renege on their contracts, and this is the key to success for every renewable project, and I hope so that this situation will improve, and it is improving. Thank you.
Right. I think you have highlighted some really important points over there. So let me turn to you, Karan. What is your perspective on the current landscape, and what are the kind of emerging trends or technologies you can, probably see in the future, and you can talk about which are shaping the industry right now?
Yep. So I think, Aarushi, it's a very difficult question to answer when you say about what are the current trends, right? Because every segment in India is very different. Again, even globally, it's very different. The residential segment, the pain points are different. The C&I segment, the pain points are different. But when it comes to large scale, the pain points are very different, right? So I think the emerging trends when it comes to, let's say, specifically on the C&I segment, as Vinay and Mr. Hitesh also pointed out, that power selling mechanism is gaining a lot of traction, because from an investor point of view, signing a PPA with a, let's say, a top 100 listed organization is much more secure than probably signing a PPA with a discom, which might not have the same level of CRISIL rating or a bankability, right? So for them, those PPAs are much more attractive, much more secure, right? But then comes the challenge on the hindsight, right? Because when it comes to Presco project, and again, I'm not talking about open access where they source power from a land-based project, right? When you talk about rooftop projects wherein the C&I installations are on the roof, and basically the question being asked here is that the power is being pushed out at the point of demand, right? So it is good from a consumer point of view, but it's creating a lot of challenges when it comes to the discoms, right? Because what we are now foreseeing is that the peak load demand on the utilities during the peak generation is actually dipping, right? So it is a phenomenon which is more prevalent in, let's say, Southern Australia, for example. So what they are seeing is that it's almost forming a duck curve, right? Wherein the peak load or the peak demand on the grid during the generation hours is so low that it's very difficult for them to stabilize the grid. So we presume that as and when the CNI segment, as and when the corporate PPAs gain more traction, more popularity, more penetration, this will start becoming a bigger and bigger challenge, right? So this is where the onus is on the discoms, right? But unfortunately, most of the distribution companies in India are owned by the government, right? So their financial health is not suitable. So what do, right? So they will indirectly try to create barriers, right? So they will probably create wheeling charges, transmission charges. So they will subsidy charges, cross subsidy charges, right? So they will make this segment more unattractive, right? From a technical point of view, it's actually good. But again, what they are doing, we cannot really say to them that, guys, what you're doing is not conducive to the growth. But it is the reality, right? If I talk about other regions, other countries, right, wherein there are specific tenders in the tune of gigawatts, which is basically for the stabilization of the grid. I'll take a simple example. Pathfinder. So the Pathfinder one, which was a tender launched in the UK 2 years ago. So it was basically for certain applications of energy arbitration, energy arbitrage, peak load shaving, inertia, right? And it was open and it was technology agnostic, right? So conventional technology can also bid, meaning flywheel, synchronous condensers, StatCon, diesel generators. So they can also bid. Even the best technology could have also bid for those projects, right? So in the Pathfinder one, it was a split of 60% conventional, 40% BESS-based technology, right? So which is, again, very good. But the recent Pathfinder 2 tender, which was tendered out, I don't know the exact capacity, but the shift was tremendous. It was almost 100% investors who won the project were towards conventional technology, right? So this is the ask of the future, or let's say clearly, it is the ask of the present as well, right? Going forward, we need to basically support our distribution companies, our TSOs, our DNOs, and all the dispatch organizations in India. They need to be commercially supported as to how they can basically stabilize the grid, right? Penetrating solar or any intermittent source is just one facet of it, Aarushi. We really have to think on the other side as well. What are the challenges these guys are actually facing, right? Now, when we talk about emerging technologies, so if I go back, and again, I'm considering on a global platform. If I go back 6-7 years, we were all talking about grid following, right? So I think most of us in the technology space, I think Vinay, you are aware, right? We were all talking about grid following technology, wherein the solar based inverter was only following whatever the grid was setting, right? So it was like the RMS values, whatever was the frequency, whatever was the voltage, the inverter was simply following. But the past, I will say 3-4 years, the technology has evolved into mostly grid supporting. And what's happening globally is grid forming. So what I can honestly say is that technology available globally, and it is already commercially viable. It is already being implemented in countries across Europe, across Australia, US, UK, is grid forming. So what it means is IBR based resources with a coupling of batteries for sure, right? It cannot happen with just solar panels. They need battery to augment the power. So the future ask is basically grid forming. So I always take this example, right? That India, when it comes to the telecom spectrum, right? So we only heard about the 2G spectrum. We only then heard about the 4G and 5G, right? We did not go through the 3G spectrum. So basically, Indian government did beautifully. And what we did was we completely bypassed the learning, the mistakes of the 3G spectrum, right? And today, where we are sitting, the bandwidth, the speed of internet, the speed of voice calling in India is one of the fastest in the world. So we have already leapfrogged the entire learning curve, right? So this is the perfect opportunity for India to skip the learning of grid supporting, right? We don't need to follow the mistakes of other regions in the world, other countries. We can simply inculcate their learnings, right? And skip the curve, right? So I think my ask to the entire forum here, and even to the Indian organization, the government, discoms, is going to be, let's skip the curve, guys. We have done this in the telecom spectrum. We can do this in the renewable spectrum as well. The technology now is available for grid forming. It is already proven, it is already tested, right? So it's something we can easily replicate. Why to repeat the same learnings? Why to do the same mistakes with other regions are doing, right? So I think that is what I will say is the emerging technology, which is already prevalent across the world. Now it's a matter of how Indian authorities, meaning MNRE, SECI, how are they able to inculcate those things in the tenders, right? Because most of the tenders we see in India are very, very, to be honest, like vanilla is not the right word, but it is very simple and open-ended when it comes to what the battery technology is supposed to do, right? So they will say, okay, you need RTC power, you need a percentage of your PV power as a storage component. But what that storage component should do, I think it is a huge, let's say, gambit of possibilities, right? So we really need to evaluate those things. And there are, I can tell you honestly, there are some discoms which are much more aggressive. So the typical example is the recent tender which was rolled out by BSES Rajdhani. So that's a 10 megawatt, 10 megawatt PV, 20 megawatt hour application. So it's a 2-hour application, but I think it's basically a test bench for them. Same thing, I think recently there was a tender announced by GUVNL, right? So yes, it's a prima facie a very lean application, but I think these things will help the technology evolve, right? Help the investors evolve. And from a financiers point of view, Aarushi, what it will also open up is other avenues for investors to make money. So for example, the key term, the talk of the town in the European countries is energy arbitrage, right? Because the battery prices are now so much more aggressive. What they usually do is, so we have, for example, UK. So this year, SMA, again, only tell about SMA's perspective. We have shipped last year around 2 gigawatt of storage inverters in the UK itself. And that storage projects of 2 gigawatt have zero component of PV, right? And the application in most of the cases is energy arbitrage, peak load shaving, and grid support. So inertia applications, right? So energy arbitrage means during the peak generation time where the tariffs are lower, all these investors are doing is storing power in the battery. And when the peak tariffs are higher, they're just discharging the power, right? So it will also open up many more investment avenues, many more return avenues, right? For investors, for financiers like SBI and all the other organization available in India. So I think that is what we really need to look at, Aarushi, from a technology standpoint.
I was saying that you have really, pointed out and you have summed it up really nicely. Yeah. So, Mr. Jain, let me ask you, what do you think are the implications of low prices on India's solar deployment and manufacturing sector, including PLI? And what do you think needs to be done more?
Right. So a couple of things. There's of course PLI scheme that the government has implemented, and then there are other policies such as ALMM and BCD that are applicable in solar cells and modules. Because of the PLI itself, we are expecting approximately 50 gigawatts of solar module, similar size of solar cell manufacturing in the country. Approximately 45 gigawatts of wafers, and maybe nearly 30 gigawatts of polysilicon facility because of PLI. But even beyond PLI, there is a lot of manufacturing facilities that are being set up, mostly modules. And some estimate says that this may reach up to 100 gigawatts by 2027. While these numbers are very attractive, they're also very ambitious. We need to realize that last year, as Vinay had earlier pointed out, we set up 7 gigawatts. In the current financial year, there's the similar numbers. Maybe in the new FY, we may set up around 20 gigawatts because of the projects that are in pipeline. So what do we do with so much manufacturing capacity that will exist in the country? So it's not just the implications. The implication, one, I would say, of the low prices are significantly a lot on the sustainability of the manufacturing. I mean, 5 years ago, if you would have said what is the implication of low price, I would say that discoms will buy solar like anything, right? Because the prices would have anyways reduced to 1.99. I think that was the lowest price that a solar project that had seen. But now it's also frightening in some sense when the prices reduce significantly in the global markets. There's enough evidence that the domestic manufacturers have not been able to compete with these, and I'll maybe give out a few reasons why. First of all, most of our existing facilities, historically and even current, is ballooning up on the module assembly side, right? That is not where a lot of technical innovations happen. So we still import solar cells. A lot of it is now coming from ASEAN because we have FTAs with ASEAN where there's no basic customs duty applicable itself. So you can still import solar cells at zero customs duty. And then maybe if you have to export, you can still export, or maybe utilize it in India itself. The other aspect is there's enough evidence also that if you are integrated backwards, at least you manufacture cells, the profit margins or the possibility of even having profits are way higher than you're just having modules itself. So if solar module companies are not integrating backwards, it will be very challenging for them to continue supplying module at a prices that are at the same at par with the Chinese or any other company's prices. So we would have to integrate backward. Thankfully, because of PLI, we'll of course see some integration beyond. But the two other major bottlenecks are in the wafer and polysilicon facilities, manufacturing itself. That is where there's a significant concentration in terms of the capability, skills, infrastructure that exist in China. Wafer manufacturing already was 90% plus. It's expected to be 95% by end of this decade in China, despite all of these facilities coming up in India. And we have to also realize the polysilicon is both energy intensive, and there are news that many of these manufacturing facilities, including polysilicon facility in Europe, that are shutting down because they're unable to compete with the prices that are there in the global markets. Now, what does all of this mean for India? One, there is only so much that the government can do to support domestic manufacturers, right? There is again enough evidence that even with BCD, the domestic manufacturers have not been able to compete. But there is enough benefits both in terms of economic growth and jobs when we have a good manufacturing sector. So I think we need to support them for sure, but there's enough more that we would need to do beyond PLI, ALMM, and BCD to actually ensure that some of these facilities continue to manufacture modules, not just for India, for the global market. So in here, we need to also realize that there are a couple of other important aspects. First of all, while the PLI wafer manufacturing will start in the next couple of years, many of these companies it will be their first foray into these manufacturing, both polysilicon and wafer. I think the government, along with some of these research institutions like CSIR and others, need to already step up efforts so that the technology development happens, or at least if the technology is available somewhere, some sort of small pilots projects are being set up in the country itself, so that there's some capability that is being developed, because these are very, very complex processes, both in terms of operating some of these equipments to, of course, manufacturing some of these steps. The second is there are some of these other raw material that go into these manufacturing, from as simple as silver paste to some of the other chemicals that would be required. And even those steps, there's only a handful of companies that do these globally. Now, from silver paste, there are some startups now globally that are moving from silver paste, or at least aim to move from silver paste to copper paste. Now, is that a technology that we should start investing in, given that maybe by 10 years, 12 years from now, or maybe even 5 years from now, we'll have a new alternative material. So there we can build our edge itself. What I'm basically saying is that if we compete with the incumbents using the same technology, it will be very difficult. But we have to then figure out that where is that through our innovation in a technology that is still not commercialized. Can we, because we'll be more or less at the similar standing with China and maybe other countries globally, can we then start improving our capabilities? The other bit is technology is changing significantly. Most of the market share right now is for monoPERC, approximately 70% last year. And this is expected to reduce significantly by 2030. And the majority of the share, maybe around 60-65%, will be HJT and TOPCon. So, of course, we have many of these companies in India that are manufacturing TOPCon. But again, we have to also manufacture wafers and sell for these technology itself, not just the modules. Because we can then tap up the next generation, whatever solar module technologies that will be there. Finally, I would say that across the value chain, there's so much innovation that is happening, even in terms of the existing products. Like the polysilicon consumption per watt peak of solar module is in the range of 2 to 2.5 to around 2.5 gram per watt peak, is expected to reduce 2 gram per watt peak. Given that the recent increase in solar module prices 2 years ago was because the polysilicon prices had shot up significantly. Now they have, of course, bottomed down, but every gram of polysilicon, or every 0.1 gram of polysilicon that we reduce can significantly impact the cost. The efficiencies of many of these modules are also increasing, which of course then means that we have to manufacture thinner wafers and then ensure that some of the losses that are happening in the polysilicon to wafer step also reduce. So I would say all these steps are fairly complex as we move backwards. We don't have experience of doing some of these earlier. Even if PLI targets are to be met by 26, 27, 28, we need to start today at a very small scale. Otherwise, the decrease in prices of solar module globally will significantly impact the sustainability, because if many of these facilities have to sustain, they will have to look beyond Indian markets, because Indian markets will only be able to serve maybe 30% of their capacity. 70%, 60 to 70% will have to go outside. And how would you compete with that market? Because you can have ALMM, BCD, PLI for the Indian manufacturing in the Indian contour. But if you have to sell in, say, Africa, if you have to sell in Europe, you have to compete with the Chinese counterparts. So it will be significant. The other bit I would just want to quickly highlight is that the challenge with some of these low prices is that I'm hoping that many of the previous tenders that have been signed do not open for renegotiations. We have seen that some of these in the past, but if the battery prices, significant reduction in module prices, also then give a thought to whatever idea to some discount that, okay, now the price have reduced, maybe we should renegotiate. That will be a very bad signal, and we should not go down that path again. Thank you.
Right. I think we are heading to the end of our conversation. So let me request each one of you to kindly share your closing remarks, starting off with Mr. Paliwal.
See, at the end, I can say so that business is a paradox, and it is all lasting stability, continued change. What we had discussed, I think the policy mandarin sitting at the Doyen office, they are taking cognizance of everything. And we could see as a lender that a lot of legworks which are happening. And down the line, we will see that this may implemented at the ground zero also. Whether it is a vagaries of the power demand, wherein we could see that the peak hour, non-peak hours. So therefore, hybrid, the projects are coming up. Battery storage infra is also now buzzword. And now in hydro also, if you see the PSP, power storage projects also, in a big way, they are. I hope. Am I visible? Am I visible and audible?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. So this is how it is, and although we can always analyze that what was the ecosystem and how it is panning out, but we have to really take cognizance of this one thing, that earlier we were bereft of resources, and today we are, I think, on the resource side, we are well placed, whether it is on the captive equity side or on the lending side. And I think now the time that every stakeholder should stare at that, now we should leapfrog in order to meet these targets, and which are not sovereign targets. See, ultimately, the carbon neutral environment is giving pedestal and impetus to the ecosystem, wherein the down the line generations will thrive and survive. So each one of us should contribute to it, and I think we are on a right trajectory. And down the line, we will see that more spade work will happen on this particular path. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Karan, your closing remarks.
Yeah, thank you, Aarushi. So I think my closing remark will be the same statement I made during my 15 minutes. It's a perfect opportunity for the Indian diaspora, the utilities, the discoms, investors, any and all stakeholders to perfectly basically skip the curve, right? We can adopt the latest technology which is prevalent and bring those best practices already in to the Indian technological landscape. So I think my closing remarks will be the same, Aarushi, that it's a perfect opportunity for us to leverage the learnings, leverage the technology which other nationalities and regions have tried, and basically skip the curve and move to the technology which is now commercially and technically viable and available across the world, right? So yeah, that will be my closing remark, Aarushi.
Thank you. Mr. Jain.
Thanks, Aarushi. So a couple of things I would say: policy certainty, technology innovation, and international collaboration. These will be three important things for us in the next coming years if we have to actually accelerate the energy transition itself. So these are the three things I would say. If we are able to solve for many of these through a whole of government approach, I would say we'll be able to actually achieve the intended outcomes. Thanks.
Right. Lastly, Mr. Rustagi.
Yeah, so Aarushi, I think we discussed various challenges in the
Yes.
discussion today, and I think we do need a systematic approach to identify each of those challenges and develop the right solutions. But I think I want to kind of raise one more topic, which is that, this whole point about solar and even wind being intermittent and hence some kind of an inferior sources of technology. That kind of thinking really needs to be kind of dealt with and addressed very, very decisively. We do need a very kind of, I would say, a fundamental change in the way we think about renewable technology. There are various technology as well as policy-based tools which can address these kinds of challenges. Today, we are at the cusp where the storage technology, whether it is battery, pump storage, or even other technologies which are kind of very, very attractive and combined with renewables can provide a genuine alternative to conventional sources of power. So, we have seen in the last, even in the last 6 months, the government has constantly, been expanding the thermal capacity addition targets, for example, in the next 7 years. We've gone from 0 to 30 to now we're talking about 80 gigawatts of thermal capacity addition because India clearly is prioritizing energy availability more than energy security, than I would say the environmental aspects of energy. And I think that we do need a change in the mindset that renewables is not just an intermittent source of power. It can, combined with the right kind of policy and other technology-based mechanisms and levers, can address the intermittency challenge. And hence, we should move the focus back to renewables and stop going in the direction of conventional sources of power back again.
So I think it was a very informative discussion all along, and thank you everyone for joining with us today. Thank you so much.